rămâne coroniata Titei Delgado, acolo este, va fi corner, dragi ascultători.
Hello, subscriber base of Verde Broadcasting. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Troping Mechanism, the show where we discuss various tropes and stuff we've observed in films that either identifies a period or a genre or just typifies filmmaking of a certain era. I'm back, of course, with my good co-host and pal and all the rest of it, Richard Jackson.
Hi. Hi, Jackson.
Today we're discussing a trope that I sort of identified through. I was actually listening to another podcast in which they were talking about Speed 2 Cruise Control, which is a really
a quality film.
Well, yeah,
quality film with a really good, not unwieldy title.
Yeah, what's Cruise Control got to do with boats? Anyway, never mind.
That's right.
A car thing. Anyway.
That's right.
Yeah. If you could hum me the theme tune, you would. That being the tendency of action films, I would pin it down between the sort of early to mid 90s to the early noughties of our hero jumping off something or doing something and rappelling, always having something, whether it be a winch or it was always
fire hose.
A fire hose, yes, we'll get into that. Inevitably. But yeah, and specifically the sort of filmmaking around it, and what there was always a certain type of shot. Now, I would point to examples of this being things like. Because I think you found potentially one of the jumping off points for it, so I'll let you do that.
Jumping off points.
But my one thing I would point to is something like, obviously, like in The World Is Not Enough, James Bond film, there's a bit where James Bond jumps off a balcony and it's ridiculous. He's attached to a
chandelier?
A blind. No, it's like he's pulled the thing off a blind. Like how that was going to be 3 stories long, I don't know. I don't know. Apparently in Bilbao, Spain, people like to open their blinds from
3 stories down.
Apparently,
yeah.
But anyway, he does that, and it's a humorous scene because he attaches it to another guy who gets pulled like a guy who's knocked out.
Gets pulled off.
It pulls him off. Pulls you off the ground. The hammer pulled you off. But there's this very, and I think there's lots of this influence with that shot, and it's a great shot as well. Michael Apted directed, all the rest of it, very good. Of sort of Pierce Brosnan's stunt double jumping off a balcony from top down, and he goes flying, and you get that great sort of sense of depth of the character like falling, and literally, but it was a thing that. I mean, to carry on with the James Bond thing, there was a game called Everything or Nothing, in which one of the things...
Was that the Bond moments mechanic? Where you would...
It wasn't a Bond moments mechanic, but it was a thing that... I think it had that in it, but it was a thing you could do where if ever you were on the edge of something, and it was a thing they made a lot of hay out of, it was like you could jump off, and he would literally do a thing, like he would spin in the air. Like this, it would ever happen in a Bond film, but he would spin in the air, pull out a rappel, shoot it up, connected thing, and then as he's turning, connect it to his belt or whatever, and turn around, and then you could literally walk down.
So like a Batman move.
It was quite cool, but it was very much a Batman move in a Bond thing. I'm using James Bond as an example because that's a great, that's usually the marker of action films, but it's true of other things as well. There was a lot of that sort of like hero clips thing to belt, like rappels down thing. Like it was a lot for some reason. They did it in 24 as well. There was in I think season 4 he goes down like a laundry chute or something on a rappelling harness, and it was all very like everyone had to rappel, and like everyone had to increase Speed 2 Cruise Control. There's a lot of things of like every time you need to get to something, there's like a harpoon with a winch on it that doesn't exist.
Yeah, my theory being that action movies were sponsored by big winches in the 90s.
Well,
like
I
the winch lobby.
I wondered if there was a thing about like I don't know, like it's about being able to throw yourself off something, because again it was that sort of bungee jumping craze and all that thing about whether or not it was about society that needed to frighten themselves with that tethered to something, with all that safety. It's that safety net thing. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm going
this is I gotta say, when you said this to me earlier, I considered it a left of field pick. I was kind of like, okay,
it's very much so.
There's clearly something Duncan's onto here. What my immediate thoughts are twofold. Fold the first. Batman and Die Hard.
Yeah.
As we think that already released Die Hard, have prominent kind of repelling stuff.
Yeah.
In the Batman and the grapple gun, and that got referenced in like Mallrats and other stuff, and then Die Hard, of course, with the Fire hose.
Yeah.
The other thing is like this sort of popularity and emergence of extreme sports and its influence on cinema. So like Point Break and stuff like that, and even fucking Batman, Ran Robin has like ice skating and stuff like that.
Parkour later on with
Parkour came into Bond, and then like a bunch of other stuff. But there was this kind of, because it was something that, like all things, it had previously been fringe, and then someone got hold of it, and then it got ruined, like all things. And not that I was ever really into extreme sports or anything, but it's just this thing where you just have to have it in there, so it became a cinematic thing. So I don't know what happened in the 90s to cause us to express our anxiety about not being able to shoot harpoons and therefore having to vicariously live that through the world of cinema.
I don't know what it was. Yeah, I'm not sure who, because it was, I mean, because some things come about because filmmaking techniques have been developed. Like, for example, you know, I keep using James Bond, but James Bond's a good example of, it's the one franchise that's been around so long that you can kind of go, well, you can identify time periods with it and what was cool and what wasn't and all that kind of stuff. So, for example, like Thunderball was off derided because of the fact that a lot of it takes place underwater, and they'd obviously just developed sort of underwater shooting techniques. So they got a bit overindulgent with their underwater stuff, which translates into arguably not very interesting cinema because you're watching fairly nondescript people because their faces are all covered. I mean, James Bond has to be in a red,
just so you can
thing,
tell,
so you can tell who's who, and you've got two armies coming at each other, but it's very hard. And it's slow, and it's, you know, but whatever. But it was an aesthetic that came out of that, and then a lot of films had that in it. And I wonder if, I don't know with my example, whether or not it's because they developed a way of. I know the computer controlled cable systems, because I've seen them in action on film sets and stuff like that. That was back when Chris Reeve was flying a Superman, it was guys on with pulleys and stuff.
like actually.
But now they've developed these things. It's weird. It looks like a cone with loads of ridges in it, and it's a thing where you can, if you feed the wire through, basically just by running the wire back and forth, it allows for greater deceleration or high.
Okay, so it's like a precision machine.
Yeah, and it's all like computer control. I saw them when we were doing Snow White and Maleficent and that kind of thing. People, they would use them, and it was a way of, because it was all computer controlled, you can literally fling people in different, and it can all be very safely done.
Sounds kind of sweet, man.
It's pretty. I've always wanted to get on a flying rig and see what, but I mean, the way they do things now, I don't think it's quite as exciting. But you know,
I jumped off a building in Bolivia.
Did you?
It's quite a funny story. You get 2 goes for like the equivalent of 35 quid, right? And what you do is you go down face first and you jump off, and they like winch you down, kind of. They free fall, and then they slow your descent. Paid for 2 goes each, and my friend Simon, bless him, he got to the top and just freaked out. He couldn't do it. Real problem with heights, so I took all 4 of his goes. Like, he couldn't stop me. I was just like, woo! Like, and I did it dressed as Spider-Man as well.
Did you?
They got like a rack of like somewhat inappropriate, frankly,
yes.
like Iron Man and Spider-Man and shit like that. You put on one of those things, but then you've got like, I was wearing a Spider-Man like kind of one piece.
Yeah.
I chose the comic accurate one, not the Amazing Spider-Man version, which was available, which is fine. But then they put like a really ropey old harness on you, and like a helmet. You just look like a dick. Not like expected to jump off a building in La Paz and not wear a helmet. If I'd bunged them a few shekels, they probably would have let me.
Yeah.
But that's the closest I've been to it. It's a lot of fun.
Well, so there's an interesting thing. So why was it fun to you? Was it the sort of like, I can pretend I'm looking death in the face, but really I know I'm not?
Yeah, because it's like controlled danger, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like bungee jumps and stuff like that. I will say this actually, because it's funny because you've got any kind of simulated danger. Because I did a bunch of stuff like that on holiday, man. Right. I did like quad bike and shit, and like, you know, I'm not insured, don't have a license, can't drive, and they're just like, 500 cc's, there's the keys, bring it back in one piece. Like, it was straight up like that. But yeah, it did feel like I was doing a stunt in a movie, unlike maybe bungee jumping and stuff like that, because what you do is you go up to a window, and if you imagine you've got your back to the room and your front to the city, right, and you just lower yourself down to 90 degrees so you're parallel with the ground, and then you just jump.
Wow. And
you can bounce off the building, and they kind of slow your descent with winches as you go. So what you do is you walk up to this big mechanism, you're dressed as Spider-Man in a helmet, and like 3 or 4 guys have to be there doing the safety checks, and they harness you in, they plug you in, put your helmet on, and they sort of like tap you on the head and like, okay, you do this, you do that, if there's a problem, you do that. All this prep, and it feels like you're doing a stunt. And then it was this like 50-story hotel, I think, in the middle of La Paz. And you can see the whole city around you, and like all the Bolivians are just like really numb to white twats jumping off their buildings. I've seen it all before. Yeah. But yeah, it felt like being a movie star, I guess. It kind of had like sort of that stunt element to it, because all this setup, and then you just have to go like, whoa, and jump off.
Because you sort of wonder if these things come out of societies that are far enough generationally away from war, far enough away from real danger and real threats to there, and whether or not that as humans we need that as a thing to sort of. I know I've gone very deep into some other side of it, and ultimately what a lot of movie making is about. It's like, why do we go and watch Tom Cruise, nigh on kill himself every time?
Well, I was thinking about this exactly in relation to the Mission Impossible series, because Mission Impossible Rogue Nation is out. And,
Fallout.
Fallout.
Rogue Nation, it's been out for a long time.
Sorry, whatever. The new Missione Impossibile. I mean, any kind of entertainment like this, surely, and there's more of this now in our culture with various apps and stuff. I don't want it to sound like my dad, but I think it's a lot of it is based around vicarious experience. I mean, video games, like, I don't know what it's like to be a spy sneaking into a missile base, or at least I didn't until I played Metal Gear Solid, which is nothing like being a real spy, but I got that vicariously. Yeah. And knowing Tom Cruise is doing this shit, like, for real, does that enhance it? Is that why I'm more kind of into it? Like,
from a filmmaking standpoint, I'm quite into that in terms of, because it allows you to do a lot that you couldn't otherwise do in terms of shots, in terms of setups, in terms of all that. So that for me is the draw. But I have to say, as an actor, like, I come at these things, like, one of the appeals of acting for me, apart from the sort of creativity and the collaboration, which is one of the main things for me, but is the fact that I get to go and do things. This is partly what draws me to film and TV rather as opposed to stage, is the fact that I've had to go up in a helicopter before with the door open and fly along a runway. I've had to do all sorts of things where I had to actually go and do it, and it's like there's a real appeal in that, and it's perhaps a side of me where I'm like, yeah, but I don't have to commit decades of my life to mastering a skill or a craft. I have to just sort of turn up and pretend like I know what I'm doing when really there's a bunch of people.
Well, look, for a non-actor, it's mine. I'm all about white dickhead on holiday, because it's like they even call it in the route we took in South America. They call it the Gringo Trail. Right. Like, I have no pretenses. There's those people going like, oh yeah, I'm travelling. I was like, nah, mate, I'm on holiday. There's cheap cocktails and I get to go on a quad bike. I wasn't a dick about it. But, I'm not an actor, so I don't get to fuck about in helicopters and stuff, unless I go to a country with very minimal health and safety legislation where they let me dick around in vehicles I wouldn't otherwise be allowed to use. I can go whitewater rafting, I can do zipline and all this shit without a proper safety briefing because I've paid to go to the other side of the world.
Right.
And I did all that shit, because I did like the Death Road in Bolivia and shit. Like, I spent a year saving up for this fucking holiday, and I went and did it because I'm into all that, and I don't know. And a part of it does, there's that kind of strange action movie feeling, because when I went to the States I fired guns, and I went on a helicopter ride when I was in the States, and when I was in South America I went and did all this crazy shit that I probably couldn't do here. And my mind being my mind, every time I'm doing one of those things, it's always like, well, this is like the scene in, and that's the way I approach it.
Okay.
I can't help that.
No. Okay. No, it's interesting. I mean, I suppose that it's weird that this trope has now expanded into
holiday stories.
No, not at all. Because actually, I think it's very relevant, and I think it is interesting. Because what I'm getting at, and what this sort of series of podcasts I suppose is about, is saying, look, why was a certain thing popular? Because it became such a crutch. I'm using this as an example, but there's tons of other examples out there which we'll get to, I'm sure. But it was a real crutch for filmmakers at one point or another that our protagonist had to rappel down something or up something. Or
hold on. That's basically the entire concept of cliffhanger, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
It's about a kind of mountaineer guy who has to be able to get his mountaineer boner back after he killed someone, and there's tons of. It's one of these classic guy has a skill that's not normally used to resolve action situations.
Well, and funnily enough, that plays into our next episode, which I won't go into too much.
Yes,
but it is sort of in that same ballpark. But I mean, there's and I just wonder if there's an allegory there that was relevant at the time, and whether or not it was. I mean, I don't want to get too pretentious about it, but I do think that there must be a reason why there was a healthy appetite for.
It's weird how these things. By the way, I want to call it now. I almost didn't want to say, but can we call this episode "Rapel on Earth"?
Yes, absolutely, we will.
That's my idea. But the kind of the strange thing of rappelling down stuff, and they love something that still happens, of course, is every time you get like a SWAT team. They have to rappel down into the building and stuff like that.
The negotiators.
The Ghostbusters rappel, don't they? Into the
slime.
They go to the slime thing, and that is classic with the coil being wound up. I don't know if coils were new. I want to look into the coil lobby.
Does it go back to things like Jaws, where it was used as a storytelling device for obviously when the reel started going out, that was to tell you about the shark and everything? And they shoot the barrels onto the shark and stuff like that. It was done in well, you know, Die Hard with a Vengeance. There was that thing when they used the winch. I know it's not quite the same as rappelling, but they used the winch to get on the boat, and it's like, and that's how long you've got left before your time runs out.
So it's sort of like
it's like a ticking time bomb.
Exactly. A ticking rope bomb.
Yeah.
It's like rope. It's wire. I don't fucking know.
But it is a way of sort of saying that danger is imminent. You know,
I suppose there is that. It's sort of like a countdown clock, isn't it? Because how long is a piece of rope?
Yeah.
Like it's it's sort of like that. So it's good. And the shot they always like to use, and I do agree that it's a weird trope because it doesn't happen so much anymore. It didn't seem to happen so much before.
Yeah.
But when you have the shot of the spool,
yes,
and the cable's running out,
yeah.
That's a very visual shorthand for whatever the bad thing that happens when the cable runs out will happen soon.
Yeah,
you've seen that owing to the visual shorthand of the reducing cable, because it's like fluid running out of a bottle or clock counting down.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's just I don't want to derail this, but maybe it's just fucking laziness. It's kind of like we need some tension. All right, we'll get a spool in. We'll have a spool soon.
Here's so perhaps I don't want to keep coming back to this series of films, but the Bond. You know, if you look at Pierce Brosnan's 4 Bond films, it starts out in Goldeneye when he jumps off the dam. And that was always that's a classic, cool thing.
Oh God, that's a huge,
an incredible stunt,
one.
right?
Yeah.
Tomorrow Never Dies. They do kind of that with the banner. You know, where they've ripped down Jonathan Pryce's face. Not quite as good. Yeah. Kind of it's Die Hard. That is Die Hard in a nutshell, right? It's exactly the same thing, and it runs out and they have to smash through the window. Well, there's not enough. It's this blind thing. It's starting to get a bit daft. He also has.
It's very home based.
Well, yeah, and it also has in his watch. He has a Rapel thing that he, right?
The Titan Star.
Come Die Another Day. It's way used up, and they're using it like Halle Berry's. Even the way the shot's done and everything, she sort of rappels down into the Eden Project, and it looks hokey, and it just looks. So it's an interesting over the course of those 4 films, that whole trope went from being incredibly cool and still is to being totally overused.
Running to the ground,
running to the ground.
And that comes at the end. You know, I think the Die Another Day marks the end of a certain type of film. You know, I think there's that kind of indulgent spectacle like that, which is a fucking great example of shoehorning in extreme sports stuff with like the ice car.
Yeah, I mean it's that film. I think in the fullness of time. Look, it's sort of I don't consider it to be the Batman and Robin of Bonds. I do think there's merit to it, but it's not. It is a sort of interesting phasing of that franchise in quite a short period of time. You know, 95 to 2002. It's only 7 years worth of stuff. And
felt longer at the time, didn't
it? Yeah, I guess so. I suppose you had Austin Powers like slapped in the middle of it all, which kind of made things difficult. But it's an interesting. It's an odd trope, one that like you say isn't here anymore. And I'd love to sort of work out the end point of it. I wonder if it comes down to things like. You know, like nowadays we've often talked about how like with Superman they don't really like to see him fly. Is that a thing they just think is hokey
sort of like and the red pants as well.
Yeah,
I've got kind of in the sky. So the thing is, so like Austin Powers is a good example because it kind of come and whapped its dick in Bond's face just when Bond was coming back. Right?
Yeah,
and it sort of may have shut some things down. Do you remember? This is a deep cut for children of the 90s. Did you remember like spliffy jeans and Eclipse clothes?
Yes.
So for those of you who don't know, like spliffy jeans, keep it in mind I was 11, so there's a weird trend among kids. You would have a brand of clothing called Spliffy. There's a character called Spliffy who was smoking a spliff. There's a brand called Eclipse, and it was kind of like rave wear for kids. So it was kind of like vaguely militaristic, black combats with white stitching and waistcoats and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So basically that craze got mental in my school. All of us had spliffy stuff, and there's a bunch of 11-year-olds, and it got to a point where the school banned it in the school because of what it was, but we were outside of school. I'm going somewhere with this.
Yeah.
Hanging out around outside the school gates, I guess age 11, was me and my mates, head to toe in our spliffy outfits, right? Just hanging out as we would, cause a nuisance. About three bigger kids like walked past. And they were probably about a year or two older. They just walked past and went, "Oh look, it's the Spliffy boys." No one ever wore Spliffy again. And like the next day, everyone was back to normal clothes,
right?
And like no one ever did it again. And that was it. That was like they dragged that trend out and shot it in the head because they just showed it up with the smallest little fucking word. Killed it dead.
Yeah. Well, because it was, I suppose, because if you're doing anything that's kind of counterculture, once it becomes It's like the punk movement and all that stuff.
Yeah,
As soon as
yeah.
it becomes establishment.
It's like those McDonald's adverts that have the font like the Buzzcocks album, and it's kind of like, this girl's got a piercing and she's making chicken wraps. We're punk.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, not only 40 years too late, but you're actually McDonald's.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
it's
exactly.
that kind of mainstreaming.
It's that corporatizing of.
Are we? I think I might have accidentally argued for the mainstreaming of rappelling. When rappelling was underground, we were all into
we
it.
were all doing it. Yeah. Well, because rappelling was still around. I mean, like again, James Bond was doing it as far back as sort of like Diamonds Are Forever and all that kind of. It was obviously a thing, and there was a lot of. There was a rock climbing thing, and I don't know if that's a.
Well, Mission Impossible 2 as well. And...
Well, I mean, that was later, but I mean, I'm thinking of things like Guns of Never. You know, there was always that adventurous stuff.
Well, that kind of. I think that, like, in that era of stuff,
yeah,
like when it's Gregory Peck or whatever,
yeah.
It's rooted in this sort of H. Rider Haggard kind of colonial adventure, kind of like, we're going to climb up a waterfall, and that kind of.
I'm
Hello, my love. But that was kind of rooted in that, because I think the kind of Empire, almost Victorian sort of adventurist mould of adventure. Like be that Percy Fawcett or Quatermain and all that was kind of like this rough and ready. You're going to wear some sort of tan fatigues and climb up a rock face to go find some gold.
That was more men taking care of men things, right?
Well,
like
it changed into let's wear some what are those 90s shades called that are horrible?
Oh, the Oakleys.
Let's wear some Oakleys and a vest and climb up a cliff.
Oh yeah.
There's like fucking Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible.
Anthony
Hopkins like, we've got a mission for you, Tom Cruise in Mission
Not
Impossible.
Mission Impossible is mission. Well, not Mission Difficult. It's Mission Impossible. It's difficult to be walking about for you.
Oh god, that's the one, because I think Tom Cruise has a lot to answer for in that regard, because he likes to do extreme stuff.
Yeah, and I love him for it, because I think it's cool. But I know what you mean when it's of a moment. It's sort of
So Tom Cruise, because I've said before, like I really like Brian De Palma's Mission Impossible. I think it's a really great movie, and I think it's him doing that kind of mainstream De Palma doing a mainstream action spectacle like that. I think it's really special, and I really like it. Mission Impossible 2 is made by John Woo, who up to a certain point is one of my favourite action directors. But there's this strange intersection of like horrible post-90s gackness where it's kind of like, oh, Tom, he's dressed like a Limp Bizkit roadie, but he's a bit too old.
I think it was that trying to matrixize Mission Impossible, which just didn't. I think I don't know if that's because I wonder. I think identifiably it looks like. Well, I guess it's when you started seeing Skydance all over things, but it was like obviously Tom Cruise wrestled or bought the rights out from the studio, and so it's like, and I think they're much better for it now. I think arguably the last 3 films have been quite, and I guess with Fallout as well, is they've been of a piece. You know, they felt of a thing, and I've loved them. I watched Rogue Nation last night, and I really liked it again. But those first 2 are very odd, like oddball film, good or bad, but they are very distinct.
They are strangely. I mean, there's let's not digress into Mission Impossible too much, but they are kind of there's a history of auteur-led direction in the Mission Impossible franchise, and the idea of Mission Impossible 2 being a kind of post-Matrix Mission Impossible film is a really interesting piece of cultural coprophagy, because basically, I just like to use the word coprophagy. The Matrix basically jacked a ton of stuff from people like Ringo Lam and John Woo.
Right.
And then to Matrix up their Mission Impossible, they literally hired John Woo.
Yeah.
And it's not so much the snake eating its own tail as the tramp eating its own shit in one. But that's what that was.
Yeah, it's the bullet time with that, but it's all the slow motion. It's the big long leather jackets and sunglasses.
And stuff.
What's that cool? The thing is, when I was there as were you. I never wore that shit. It was never like, I never looked at Neo and Trinity and thought they were cool. I just thought that it was an affectation.
In the same way that, like, hey, the TechCom soldiers from Terminator are cool.
Right.
I'm not going to walk around in rags with a fucking Bluetooth headset.
You
know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's not,
exactly.
It's one of these things, because the Matrix look in particular, loads of people copied. And it's like, I watched The Matrix and I thought, all those characters are cool, but I don't want to look like that.
Yeah.
Especially not in July. Like, you walk around in a leather trench coat and shit. Like, and then, do you know what? It looks good on a movie star. Sorry, Brian, but you're going to have to leave the leather coat in Camden, mate. It's not working for you.
And it's interesting with that fad, because it became exclusively adopted pretty much by people who were nothing like Keanu Reeves or Carrie-Anne Moss. They were or Lawrence Fishburne. They didn't look cool in it. They weren't lit well for starters. They weren't framed in a nice way. They weren't like fucking dancing and jumping off roofs with guns. It's like
Well, there's also not just repelling.
That's also repelling in the Matrix.
I was going to say that it's not really repelling, but it's the culture of wire work, which also came from Hong Kong.
Yeah.
So the directors that because the Matrix massively went into that, and like Flying Daggers and all that brought that to Western shores massively. Yeah. Which is a type of repelling.
It still comes under the sort of auspices of human being suspended in the air on wires. There's and I mean, it's interesting how it's used in. It's like I think some films that are smart. I actually think The Matrix uses that in a kind of smart way. In that when you've got Trinity hanging off they use it in that sequence, obviously, when they rescue Morpheus, and it's people hanging off the helicopter and stuff like that. And you've got people who are supposed to be able to defy gravity and do all these things, but they have to be
strapped
in. They have to be harnessed and looked after. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's an interesting sort of. It's like they put the characters in danger when they have to hang off things. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. I often do. But I do think it's an interesting trope that wore itself out in a weird way. And it's like nowadays, if I mean, it's funny because seeing the trailers for Fallout, like there's obviously a scene when he jumps on a rope that's hung under a helicopter and he climbs up it and falls off it at one point, and so, but I don't think that falls under the thing of if it was Mission Impossible 2, he'd fire a fucking repelling thing at it. And like go,
and loads of doves would come out his arsehole.
Do you think it falls into the thing as well of like that was an easy way? Like it was always very like if I'm a cool person and I just need to get to the top of that thing. It's like
the idea that something looks cool.
Yeah.
I think Batman has a lot to answer for. That's such a phenomenon.
Yeah. And Luke Skywalker. I mean, he did it.
Oh yeah, he did it as well. Yeah, when he was trying to cop off with his sister.
And Empire when he goes up the AT-AT and does all that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Some mad repelling skills.
Yeah.
I just realised as well. Like the thing is, like repelling is a military thing or like a law enforcement thing that exists.
Yeah.
And people tend to fetishize those things and they look cool by just because inherently cool, and it's just something that is a cool tactic. Like it's like having the minigun or the parachute, or
it's also a way of breaking the rules, isn't it? Because you're not supposed to be able to jump off a building or be able to, you know what I mean? And so
Well, I just remembered like one of my I've said this before, but like Hard Boiled, one of my favorite action movies, like Chow Yun-Fat repels in to the warehouse scene. I just remembered, and that's 1992 or something.
Okay,
it's later than you think. It looks old, but it's later than you think. But yeah, like John Wick, and I'm just kind of thinking so much like 90s Hollywood and the Matrix really hit this big, but and they even nicked personnel, but they took so much from Hong Kong cinema.
Oh yeah.
So much. And I think it might be a bit weak for me to try and infer that the so-called repelling craze was taken from John Woo as well, but he does repel in.
Yeah. It's interesting, but there we are. I think we've probably shot the shit out of that one.
This is just one really weird digression.
Just trying to sort of string it out to half an hour, but I think we're there.
Trying to repel it out to half an hour.
Yeah. How long is a repellent string? I don't know. But it's interesting, and I think it's funny to look at tropes like this and unpack kind of what they maybe meant, or maybe they didn't. Maybe it was just something they thought looked cool, and that's why it stuck around for so long. But it's interesting that it isn't really around. Not that I can think of. I mean, I guess Batman does do it, but I mean, they don't linger on it as much as they used to. You look at Batman vs Superman, or in Justice League, it's very much you're cutting into when he lands or when he does. It's never like
Burton's Batman made such hay of the repel gun.
Yeah,
like they really did. And then there's the whole kind of thing with like how much do you weigh with Kim Basinger and all that.
Yeah.
And it sort of robotically comes around his waist.
Even though earlier you see him when he's on the ground being kicked, he's on his front and you can see the back of the belt and there's nothing on it.
I fucking hate that movie.
Well, there we are. Thank you everyone for joining us for our inaugural Troping Mechanism episode. We hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.